love starting with music. Good morning, good morning. I'm going to begin with the land acknowledgement, with the decolonizing welcoming moment. Just scrolling in my script to get to my language. All right. This land acknowledgement we share, it is based on Adrian Wong of Spiderweb Show and H. Harakuti, Sharif Williams, CUNY Racial Justice and Performance. I took both of their land acknowledgements and kind of put them together to create this. We acknowledge that settler colonizers and imperialists from Europe took and unseated the land on which we gather from the people who had stewarded it for generations. The land has been and continues to be occupied and held by force. We acknowledge that we are contributing to that legacy now. We acknowledge that settler colonizers and slavers from Europe used stolen and enforced labor of African people to subsequently develop the land. We honor the lives of all who endured and continue to endure in the face of settler colonialism and white supremacy. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let me also take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within technological structures, including the equipment and the high-speed internet, which are not available in many indigenous communities or low-income communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art that we make leave significant carbon footprints, continuing and contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect indigenous and marginalized peoples worldwide. I invite you to join us in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation and decolonization. I'm just going to pause. So that was our land acknowledgement. I'm going to take a moment to introduce myself and talk through our access and review the agenda. I'm going to pause though before I do that. Are we all good? Are access needs being met currently? Excellent. I'm going to request that all of the participants in this session put into the chat their introduction. Please introduce yourselves to the group with as you are able. Please share with us your name, your theater practice, your location, your land acknowledgement, and as always, an access check-in, a moment to disrupt the ableist assumption that we already have all of your access needs met. I'm going to model that out loud, but since we have about 60 minutes together in shared time and space, I'm going to do an introduction for myself. I might introduce, if there's other speakers, I might invite them to say out loud their introduction before they speak. But for all other participants, please go ahead and put that in the chat. So my name is Claudia Alec. My gender pronouns, they, their, she, hers, interchangeably. I'm speaking to you from the land of the Ohlone people. The people are still alive. I have a muscle disorder, which means sometimes I might look like I'm moving around or I'm making a face or something, and that is never any extra information that's about the exchange we are having or about the conversation we are having. It's just me reacting to random muscle spasms. Other than that, I've got my coffee and all of my access needs are met at this time. Thank you so much. Thank you, TCG, for providing additional access. Honestly, access can sometimes cost money, so we appreciate the investment and the planning it takes to make sure these access needs are met. So this session should be captioned. If you need the captions, there should be a button that you can hit. If you have questions about how to activate your captions, or if the captions are not working correctly for you, please message Sarah in the chat, and TCG will make sure your access needs are being addressed. We also are sign interpreted. If I'm understanding correctly, we are in a Zoom session. Zoom was not designed for our access needs, but unfortunately it is the most accessible platform out there for video conferencing with a multiplicity of people with different disabilities. So for our purposes, if you need the sign interpreter and the person who is deaf, if you need them both visible, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can pin the sign interpreter screen. We might at some point request people turn their screens on and off. So just know that at some point in this session, I will be asking you to turn your screen on and off, not only for fun conversational needs, but also potentially for access needs. Slowing myself down. I talk really fast. All right. It is wonderful to see all of your faces. Greetings. I'm going to begin us with a few words. So some of you entered this conversation through personal invitation from me. Others entered this conversation through personal invitation through the Theater Communications Group with the wonderful descriptive text that was created through our two previous leaders. So it was Beth and Christine, who have wonderful access practices out there in the world. I'm hoping that they will drop links in the chat, because if you want to broaden your access practice, they've got some great skills that they can share with you. So we will be referencing everything in that description as it was written several weeks ago. However, we will also in this session be more explicitly centering what would have been my agenda in this conversation regardless. My colleagues, who are both white, offered to step aside in this moment. And also, frankly, they didn't feel like they were necessarily the ones to hold space. They were willing, but they believed that they were not the right ones. And I agreed with them. So thank you to them for modeling stepping aside and making space. Also, that's terribly ableist. If anyone can help me with a better metaphor than that one, please do, because I've used it 5 times in the last 3 days and I feel like I'm insulting myself. But they are modeling creating space. So thank you to my colleagues. I also did not want to carry all of this labor alone. So I invited some BI, POC, Black, Indigenous, people of color who are disabled in the community to come here and support. So I'm hoping that some of them were able to make it into this conversational space. So because this creates, that invitation I did, it creates the very complicated dynamic of the population with the most need being the ones that have to advocate for themselves, because they are the ones with the competency that others have not done the labor to create for themselves. Now, I'm a systems nerd. I believe that this is all design. We are experiencing the results that inevitably come from the systems we have designed. So we're about to have an exchange about shifting systems. I want you to be thinking about shifting systems. Now, when I'm speaking, I will be trying to use the term disabled rather than disability. Now, I'm not critiquing the use of disability in the meeting description or other people's use of the term disability. I'm simply letting you know how I use that word politically. I'm using the social model. So what disables me is not my medical condition, but the attitudes and structures of society, which is I always talk about disabled audience, disabled artists, disabled community. So in the next hour, we're going to be helping us all to think about changing structures because we're thinking of this through the social model of disability, disabled. How are we disabling others? Why am I disabled? How am I disabled by structures in place already? White supremacy culture has an insidious design feature where actually, before I go there, one last thing. Please don't design your access to help you sell more seats, even though the inevitable result of having more accessibility will be the literal ability to sell more seats. However, if you make your central desire or point selling something, you are missing the point, and you will anger the audience demographic and the community you are trying to collaborate and cultivate. All right, white supremacy culture. White supremacy culture has an insidious design feature where it deflects accountability by pitting marginalized communities against each other. They create a scarcity frame where only a limited amount of justice will be available and people have to get in line for it. They create the conditions of competition for what should be a limitless resource. White supremacy culture rewards being in denial, or at the bare minimum being ignorant of its existence or the ways to dismantle or resist it. White supremacy culture punishes you when you explicitly resist it. White supremacy culture rewards you when you implicitly support it. So Black, Indigenous, and people of color, we are steeped in white culture, and we must be fully literate in it, or or we will receive some type of punishment from society if we are not fully literate in white culture. White people do not need to be literate in BIPOC culture in order to survive or navigate culture. Hearing able people, just in the same way hearing able people do not need to be literate in sign language to navigate society. White disabled folk do not need to be literate in the unique challenges imposed on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So oftentimes there's a rhetoric that suggests that it's the disabled community's turn because there's been racial progress, and that rhetoric is never, ever helpful. While we're always going to be tempted to reference what came before, because the disabled rights movement was modeled off of the civil rights movement, we need to be very careful with the way we are rhetorically approaching these ways of creating more access. So the entire point of this conversation and this session is creating accessibility without also recreating racism, without recreating white domination. I know we can have this conversation and we can do it. We are creating design models that center accessibility for Black, Indigenous, people of color, disabled folk. And that will result in maximum accessibility for your maximum number of populations that you want to collaborate with. So that is my framing introductory text, just to give us a place to start from. I shared a lot of language. I share this language not to encourage you to police other people's language, but to give you tools to exchange ideas so that you can collaboratively engage in meaning making and problem solving. At this point, I would like to invite, this is an experiment. We're going to see what happens, because yesterday I just did some sloppy invites. So we're going to see who's actually here in the space with us. I would like to invite all of my white abled participants to mute their screens. If you can turn your screen off, and while you do that, I'm going to go into my settings, because I'm remembering I actually turned this off the other day. I'm going to go into my video settings and say hide non-video participants, so that my screen will only show me video participants. Beautiful, thank you for that exercise. I encourage you to do the same, because this is gonna give you a different, I'm on gallery view, and I went into my video settings and said, hide my non-video participants. So this is what this room looks like when all of our white abled participants have muted their screens. Thank you. I'm now going to invite my white disabled colleagues to mute their screens as well. And so if this exercise has happened successfully, the screens that we see now should be the screens of Black, Indigenous, people of color, disabled community in the theater field. I'm so grateful for your presence. Thank you for being here. I'm inviting you to share your expertise with the American theater field. So I would love it if you could use the raise hand feature. I'm going to try my best to not be in the middle and facilitating between you. I'd like to treat this story circle time where everybody's just going to get a chance to get on the mic. I was unsure of how to graciously and collectively manage time together. Yesterday, Tara Moses shared this idea with me, and I found it deeply useful. To treat time as a relative. It is not our master. We treat it with respect and we love it like a relative. So this is how we work in timely ways outside of capitalist constructs of how time works and how we work with time and how we are valued and valued within time. However, we do have 60 minutes and I want to hear from the maximum number of voices. So while the first person is speaking, I and Sarah are going to be quickly, and perhaps Peter also will be helping us, quickly count the number of voices and figure out how much time each person can hold forth. But I'm just going to encourage you to speak your truth. Let us know as a theater field how we can fix ourselves. How have we as a theater field been creating the circumstances that don't let you in, that don't allow you the maximum amount of ability to do your job, to do your best work, to actually function in this field, in this scene? How have we been making it inaccessible to you. Thank you for the deep and amazing expertise. Like, I'm looking at the faces, and I already know a lot of you are, you have the expertise of having been working in this field for a while. You have the expertise of having been scholars and like educated and all of this. And also you're bringing your lived experience, which is even more valuable. And you're doing this for free. So thank you for educating the theater field for free. We are grateful for you. I'm gonna hush up and allow Sarah to help the first person who has used the raise hand feature to take the microphone while we do some math in the background. All right, let's see what this is like. Again, experimental. Hey, Sarah, has anyone queued up to speak?
Not yet.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm excited, but I'm nervous.
Give me space.
All right, so, thank you.
Ah,
I was about to say, if y'all don't want to teach us for free, this is not a mandate, and you don't have to.
right.
I made up a performative score yesterday, and this is what it was. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. All right, I'm gonna hush.
Unmute. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Claudia, for making the space and just providing space for people to share. I actually have to jump into some doctor's appointments in a bit, so I was like, cool, let me just hop in first. So I was like, it's gonna be a long day. So I just wanted to like specifically talk about in terms of accessibility, and specifically like the intersection of accessibility and like what does it mean to show up, like show up and be in allyship with Black artists and Black theater artists, and talk about specific experience. So in the Bay Area, there is a theater company called Theater First. So I've worked with Theater First in different capacities over the past few years. Sometimes that looks like being a facilitator or a moderator. Recently, I dramaturged for Skylar Cooper's piece, solo show, a one-man show, looking at like identity formation of like his experience as a Black trans man in the United States, which was really amazing. But I specifically want to speak to the first opportunity I got to like work in theater outside of doing small community-based, specifically, let's be very clear, projects produced, directed, and fundraised by individual Black theater artists who did not have access to institutions to put their work up. So this is a couple of years ago. There is a piece that to this day I am still obsessed with very deeply.
It looks like we lost Lisa for a second.
Fundraise for it and make this happen because I want to see this work exist in the world. And John Tracy, the artistic facilitator for Theater First, had hit me up about directing, like, hey, your name came up and you're really familiar with the piece. And at the time, I was in the beginnings of what has been a years-long process of treatment for a pretty severe mental illness. And was at the point that I was like, I might need to go into pretty intensive treatment. And it also became a conversation about resources. So I had a conversation and it became, hey, this is what the stipend is, this is what the payment is. And it became like I am unemployed because I am managing like a chronic mental illness and I can't do this work and then also be struggling to figure out how to pay my rent while working on this show. So when that happened, it created a space, right? So on one hand, there was a resource piece. It was like, cool, we're gonna up your stipend, which has become a part of Theater First process of doing like minimum wage for all participating artists as a standard in the past like 2 years. Two, it became a process of, again, I am actively managing symptoms. If I'm going to direct, I need an assistant director, I need a stage manager. We need to talk about a process of what does it mean if I need to step back for health reasons. And for me, years later, in addition to like resources and finances, that's still the thing that sits at the forefront for me. What does it mean to create a process that acknowledges that people's health can fluctuate and different needs will be needed at different times? There will be different access needs at different times. What does it mean to create a container that the art can still be created and that can hold people being in process? So I mostly just wanted to share that experience because I think I work a lot in different parts of the artistic field, both in theater, in terms of performing arts and things. And working in a different parallel field right now doing art, a coworker of mine had said, like, we are both theater familiar, which means on opening night, the curtains open. So no matter what, that is, Claudia, to your point, like time and relativity, that is one relativity of time that is not always as flexible. But what we do have space and control, and we can be creative and question and like approach with inquiry, is what happens in the time as we're developing the pieces, as we're inviting people into the process. Are we thinking about what types of barriers to access people are participating before they even step into the room? How can those things be addressed, and how can there be a container where, yes, in an ideal world, everyone feels like they can advocate for their own needs all the time and do so without judgment or reproach. But what does it mean to create a container where people don't always have to take the labor on of asking? And specifically, where like disabled people of color do not always have to take the labor on of asking for space, asking for support, trying to figure out if accessibility is even an option. So that's my long spiel. I know I saw several slides of people, but I just wanted to share that experience because it's meant a lot to me over the years as I've continued to reflect on it. So thank you again, Claudia. Thank you again, everyone.
I'm just going to add this extra piece to our performative score. Let's take a moment, unmic yourselves and say thank you. Thank you for that knowledge. Just thank you.
Thank you for that knowledge.
Thank you
so much.
Thank
Who wants
you.
to do my next?
Thank you for that knowledge.
Thank you for that knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Nadia, I see your hand.
Hi, everybody. So I'm able-bodied and all of that. And I'm just, in the DC area, just wanted to say hi. Hello, everybody. So something that I used to work at an institution that had a program for intellectual differences, neuro differences, so people who might be on the autism spectrum, etc., young adults in an improv group. And it was so awesome to see them grow year after year. And yet it's like, basically like the knowledge that I want to impart is if an institution has already sort of like an avenue with this kind of work, that it's always good to go deeper with it. So these young adults who were flourishing and performing, they still couldn't see the main stage shows that the organization was producing because of their differences. So I was just like, listen, we have to invite them into this space. So I ended up, with the help of another TCG, like badass, Tallery McRae, she kind of set me up to do that organization's first ever relaxed performance with what I learned from her in St. Louis. And it's always like, okay, so we have one little avenue where we are working towards accessibility, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that box is checked, that you can always go deeper with your accessibility statement and make sure that you have, interpreters on hand, or that you are having auditions that you can say, hey, so if there's a way that we can accommodate you, let us know, like, we do want to see you at this audition, blah, blah, blah. So just taking that extra step. You can't just check the box and be like, okay, but then really come up with a plan of action of, okay, so we have these 20 amazing improv students that we can invite into the space to actually see a performance, to actually be in a performance on the professional main stage. So I think it's also like, what I mean is putting on these goggles and saying, okay, how can we look at this from a multi-angle perspective if that door is open? If that door is not open, how do you start and where is it okay to start? And if you have an accessibility statement, do you have the people and the tools in place to implement that at the drop of a dime?
Thank you, Nadia.
Thank
Todd,
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For your knowledge.
you.
Thank you, Nadia.
Very much.
Thank you.
thank you, Nadia.
Go for free.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Tara.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. So the knowledge that I wanted to drop in today is that ability and being abled is something that can fluctuate within a millisecond. It's something that can happen at any time. And so what I would want to impart is that these accommodations and accessibility being prioritized does not need to only happen whenever you are going to work with a disabled artist. At any point in time, an abled person can become a disabled artist. I'm currently living with that right now. And then also there's questions about what is disability when it is temporary. So as an example, I was at a New England theater. I will be attending their program next year. Their building is not accessible. So classrooms are on the 5th floor of a walk-up. What happens if you break a leg, right? That's a temporary disability. But what do you do in the interim? Buildings aren't accessible, it's not prioritized, and then all of a sudden now the institution is in this, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do? It's a moment of panic. And then that panic then gets thrust on to you, the individual, and that is not your responsibility. So moving forward, and what theater should have long been doing is knowing that, keeping that in mind, and assuming every single person needs these accommodations, whether they ask for it or not. It does not need to be disclosed. They do not need to send out a lovely little questionnaire that will remain anonymous, because it's not, we all know it's not. It needs to be standard. Every single day, every single meeting, we have ASL interpretation. Every single day, every single time we're on one of these old conference machines, we give our visual descriptions. Every single day, every building we make, I don't care how historically relevant it is, because who built it, that's the question, is it is renovated, it is accessible, and it's not just ADA compliant, it is ADA friendly. And if you don't know what that means, that is another term to Google after this. I'm a big fan of hero words to Google. And that's the knowledge I have today. Thanks.
Thank you for that knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank
you for that knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kara, for that information.
Thank you for that knowledge.
Thank you for that knowledge. This is Claudia going to jump in with a quick observation. I'm recognizing that the thing that we're doing right now is radical and extreme, just in terms of the vulnerability that all of these knowledge holders are sharing with the field. The fact that I said, turn off your screens, other folks, this is a very vulnerable, very visible thing that we're doing. And I just want to name that. Why? Because as Black people, we're expected to perform extreme competence. We're not allowed to be sleepy, tired, anything. It will be coded as you're a drug user, you're a lazy person, you're not really well educated. Well, you know, you're people, you're just not that sharp and on top of it. So that means as people of color, as Black, Indigenous people of color, we have to perform extreme competence. And then on top of that, as disabled folk, you have to perform extreme competence in spite of. So the fact that we're actually naming, there are huge societal things pushing us to be silent about what our actual needs are. When we state our needs, we are often punished. So I'm just going to encourage the theater field. I don't want anyone to experience any backlash, and if they do, you better come and talk to me so I can shout that to the rooftops, because you don't go to your doctor and say, I'm mad at you that you diagnosed my illness. You don't go to the plumber and say, I'm mad at you that you told me my pipes is broken. You say, thank you for letting me fix my water system. All right, I'm gonna step off my soapbox. Do we have anyone else who would like to share and drop some knowledge on the field?
Yes. Yes, Teresa.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, everyone. In this pandemic, I hope that we're all coming to a time when the conversation of separating healthcare from work is becoming a reality. I've been really lucky to be fully employed in my administrative experience in the theater, but I have an autoimmune disease, which makes it financially impractical and impossible for me to not have full-time healthcare because I cannot afford my medication, which costs over $20,000 without insurance every time I get it. I am just one example. There are many examples, and never mind our technicians and our artists who have less roads towards full-time healthcare usually. So hopefully, as a country, we are seeing that reality right now. But I also hope that the theater industry can take a real look forward at who has access to benefits, and that healthcare should be universal. That's me.
Thank you for sharing that knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
sharing that knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Okay, Miss J.
Hey, y'all. Something that just came to mind is that in terms of Claudia, you're talking about diagnosing these theaters and diagnosing theater as a system as it currently, in many ways, unfortunately exists. And what comes to mind is that we still, in today's age, do not have childcare that folks who can bear children are still afraid that they're going to have to leave the theater should they have children, and that's ridiculous. As somebody who is I'm currently in childbearing age, and hopefully will have children in the next year or two, I am equal parts terrified that somebody is going to be. I'm currently an associate artistic director. I will one day be an artistic director, either of my own theater or theater I inherit. And until that time where I can make those changes, and you better believe I will be making those changes among others, is that we need the white theaters who are on this call right now, who do not currently have any plans at all for their staff or their artists who they contract about childcare beyond just, stick the kid in the back and somebody will go sit with them. You need to get it together, because y'all can't afford us to be leaving. You can't afford that. So that's what I would like to say about that. Ooh, I got jazzed up. Okay, that's it.
Thank you for your knowledge.
Thank you.
Miss J.
Miss J.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miss
Great.
J.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Boo.
Thank you. Okay, Stephen.
Yeah, something I wanted to share in this moment is sort of a confluence of my experience as a Black man, interacting with my deaf colleagues. I was part of a deaf theater company out of the National Technical Institute of the Deaf in Rochester for a couple years back when I knew no sign language. I won't SimCom now because I know capital D deaf, that's not what we're doing. But I wanted to say, so with my colleagues, at one point we were performing in Brownsville, Texas. which is right by the border. And we all wanted, the acting company, we all wanted to cross over and go to Mexico. At the time, one of the actors who happened to be deaf and Puerto Rican, coming from a lineage of, so deaf brothers and sisters, deaf parents, deaf grandparents. So a lineage of strong deafness was part of the company. We went to Brownsville. We went to Mexico, hung out, had a great time. We're coming back across the border, and I was the one who was interpreting for the deaf artists in the crew. So we got to the border, they let everybody in except the Puerto Rican artist. And I knew from tone of voice and everything else what was happening right now. So it was me, Black, Sammy, Puerto Rican, and the Border Patrol, 2 white guys, who were getting more and more involved with making sure that Sammy was not coming back. Sammy wanted me to interpret what he was saying and how he was saying it. So I was interpreting, and I knew that based on how this situation was escalating, this was about to turn bad. So with a little quick flip of my interpretation skills and my tone of voice and everything, I de-escalated the situation. And we got through. As soon as we passed through, Sammy, who was using profanity and other things, asked me, "How did you interpret what I said?" And I said, well, I know you said this and that, but based on the situation, I decided to say this and that instead. And he said, as my interpreter, you have no right to change the words that I am saying. You have no right. And if you take on speaking for me, you speak for me how I say it. You don't have the right to censor my language. And that was a huge wake-up call for me. And I carry that with me today, and it translates to me in my everyday artistry, thinking about who is interpreting whose work and who is censoring different people's words in what way. And I guess I'm thinking about what makes it feel accessible for us to be in some of these places is, I'm starting to talk about something called the 2/3 rule. If ever you are working on culturally specific work, or maybe queer, trans work, whatever it might be, work to have 2/3 of that community in the room somehow, virtually, on the phone, present, as you develop your ideas, so that the few of us, because there are often just a few of us in the room, are not either silenced or carrying the burden of being the cultural consultant. The community is more diverse than that, and the responsibility is to want to hear from the diversity within the community.
Thank you.
Thank you for that
Thank
knowledge.
you for that knowledge.
Thank you.
Stephen.
Stephen.
You.
For that knowledge. Stephen, for that knowledge.
Thank you for the knowledge.
Dropped in the comments. Keep it going, y'all. Keep dropping that magic in the comments. But let's also keep this magic going. I can't wait to hear some more knowledge. Thank you, Field. Thank you.
Okay, Charisse.
I'm Charisse Moshkani. I'm an able-bodied lighting designer in Northern Virginia. I have 2 small children. I have a 4-year-old and a 4-month-old. I just wanted to say quickly, it is incredibly possible to rehearse and tech plays as if we work in a bank. We can do these things from 9 to 5. I promise. It's entirely possible. We can do them with a 5-day work week. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Charisse. Speak it.
Charisse, you got a lot more to do.
Thank you.
Also, the tighter we keep our dropping of knowledge, the more knowledge we can hear. I'm loving how we're sharing space. Y'all are brilliant. Let's keep it going.
All right, Mona.
Hi, thank you. My name is Sharmona Mitchell, she, her, they, them pronouns, out of Seattle. In this diagnosing of white theaters, it makes me think about the thought of, as a performer and as artist, this thought of understudies as artistry. How do we, specifically as BIPOC people, we are a unique group of people with a specific experience and skill set. When we add the fact that we have a disability on top of that, that makes us that much more desirable and that much more revolutionary to be on that stage. Now, when people are inviting us to do this work and to say, here's this opportunity and this platform to say your piece, thank you for that platform. But what happens when we don't have understudies who are similar and have the same experiences that we do, who can then carry the torch for when I have something that I'm not able to do the show? Because this thought and this mentality of the show must go on. We've all been there. We've done shows when we know that we should not be. It's ridiculous. And the expectations that we put on ourselves as performers, the expectations that the theaters place on us as performers. And when I say performers, I mean all artists, because being a lighting designer, and having a disability is a thing, two things can be true at once, And what happens when it's in the middle of tech? That is your time to make this come together, and you can't come up here with an excuse. Like, as we ask for things from these institutions, I think this is something we should be bringing to the table about how can we start mentoring programs, one, to get other people to start learning these positions so we can start crafting our own theaters for a later date. But also for when these moments arise and to say, we got you. If you're gonna say that you've got me, that means you've got all of me. And when I say I am not okay, I need you to hear that I'm not okay and have a plan for when I am not okay. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mona.
Sharing your knowledge.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone, Sarah, do we have anyone else queued up to drop some useful, like, this has been amazing. Like, y'all, we just did a masterclass for the entire American theater field on Black, Indigenous, people of color, access issues, disabled access issues. And we did it in emergent style. Like, I didn't call y'all. I had no idea who was going to show up. This is how we do this. Is there anyone else who had some knowledge to share with the field? I want to make sure I am not rushing us to the next moment we are supposed to be in. All right.
Claudia, it's
Yeah?
Christine. You have a hand. Amy Chow, I think, is
Sure.
trying to.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Because I didn't hear Sarah or see anything. So
Yeah,
thank you.
I see her. She's raising her hand. Yeah.
I want to see another one. Okay, great. All right, beautiful. Then the person whose voice was just said, let's hear your voice, please.
Amy, unmute.
I'm deaf, so I'm gonna have to sign, just letting the interpreters know. I wanna first start off that as a deaf person, I sign, but I can also speak. The speech is what's given me access to the theater, because the theater is not used to deaf individuals. But last year in the summer, I showed up for an audition. I was selected as a cast member in a role, which was awesome. But the struggle then became that the theater was not ready. They were not ready. They could not find an interpreter. They kept searching and reaching out to many different interpreters in Seattle. So they have a network here of many interpreters. But one interpreter informed them that they needed to set up the interpreter way ahead of time, at least 6 months. 6 months ahead of time. So if, like me, you audition at the last minute and it's a last minute audition and they select an actor at the last minute, then they're stating that it's going to be impossible to find an interpreter for opening night. So I just wanted to share that and put that out there as my experience. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Again, Sarah, I'm going to appreciate your assistance in helping
Yes.
name voice. I think
Deidre.
Hi, Deidre. Yes, real quick. I'm Deidre. I'm an able-bodied Black producer, and just I think knowledge that I want to share, in particular for us producers, is that when the situation changes, when there's an access need that needs to be met, when someone is sick, when we need to shift, not being a slave to time and being willing to hit pause so that we can actually move forward with intentionality, and also being transparent and vulnerable with all of the actors that we have on board for the project, letting them know, thank you for bringing this to my attention, or if it's something that we've learned, and say, you know what, we need to hit pause so that we as a producing team can be intentional and create a strategy that is going to serve everyone's needs, and being okay with hitting pause and being transparent with whatever issue or access thing that we need to address.
Thank you.
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 Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Mana Simone.
Hi, coming from DC, I'm also an able-bodied person, and I've been working in casting for about 2 years now, and I've been in many a room where we're discussing the statement for what kind of diversity we want to come into the room, and many a theater that doesn't have the infrastructure in place to support disabled artists, but yet we're calling them into our spaces and encouraging them to come in. Or we're asking the same of apprentices and fellows, and we're bringing an interpreter in for that one season that they're there. So what I would encourage theaters and institutions to do is that if you create a space for one individual person for this very particular time, to make sure that that is something that continues to grow while you bring other kinds of people into your space. It needs to be meaningful, and it needs to be sustainable, and it needs to continue to grow so that more people can come in and more people have access to the space. It can't just be a one-off instance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mana Simone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ashley.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley. I've seen lots of DC, Northern Virginia, Maryland folks, and so I wanted to jump in. I am an able-bodied Black woman, and I view all of accessibility to be a large umbrella. And I know it's often used in terms of disability, but I think also things like your race, your gender, your sexuality, your background, I think all of those are important to access. I do audience services, and so for me, whenever I think access, I think being friendly, kind, welcoming, and making the space open for every single person, no matter where they come from, what they look like, that big, fun, happy feeling. That, because the fun buzzword intersectionality, I'm thinking about things like unpaid internships and fellowships, how that class discrimination, essentially, like how that affects Black people and brown people, Indigenous people, disabled people, that affects people very differently. And so I think when we think about different levels of access and being welcoming to different people, then I think you can get to a level in which you can uproot all of it. And to say, when we are being accessible, we mean accessible no matter what that means. And that means being open, welcoming, that any single person who walks into your space can enjoy can enjoy the theater, can enjoy the art that you're doing. And that's what accessibility is for me. It's huge.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We have only
Thank
2
you.
minutes left, so we're going to take
Thank
one
you.
last comment, and then I have got our closing comments and our call to action for everyone who is in this session with us. So Andy's going to drop some knowledge, and then I'm going to invite everyone to unmute their screens, join us back in the full space, and we'll do our final moment. Thank you, Andy, for dropping some knowledge on us.
Well, hello, Claudia. I just wanted to lift up what I heard some of what Amy say and Mana Simone about the trajectory. I'm a person who has invisible disabilities, visual and auditory processing. What I heard them say was, you have to start earlier. And this is not unlike the trajectory that has to be developed for POC by POC work. If people are not engaging and not able to engage, you can't just flick a switch and expect that everybody's just going to show up and there's not going to be any barriers for them. So it's really going back to the universal design idea and starting from there, figure out why, what are the barriers. And you know, it's the theater industry has been developed for people who are not like us. So you got to figure out how can you make it more accessible, and yeah, start earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for dropping that knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I invite everyone to unmute your
Thank
screen.
you.
Unmute your screens. I'm going to say a few closing remarks. First, just thank you for all of the awesome knowledge that was just dropped. I had a couple more things to add to that mix. One is just the thought that oftentimes we're framing all of this as extra. To create extra accessibility, I need extra planning time. And the truth is, actually, you've already invested sometimes up to 50 years planning inaccessibility and designing inaccessibility and creating the efficiencies of inaccessibility, which makes no sense if you want to get as many human beings into your space engaging with your work as possible. So this extra time you're spending, it's not actually extra, it's you doing the labor of rebalancing how you should have always been functioning in a healthy internal ecosystem, planning ecosystem at your institution. So it's all about that design. So you need to do some dramaturgical assessments of how you do your things and fix them. Listen to what we've been saying. Also, nobody mentioned casting. I just want to name that the default is white dominant, and white is not neutral. That's not a neutral choice. That is a culturally specific choice. So always be thinking, what is the culturally specific casting choice I'm going to make in this moment? Your choices are not neutral. And when all of the dominant representation is of whiteness, it also means all the money is going into white people's pockets. This is not just about representation, it's about equity. Okay, final comments before we go off into the world. I wrote this down so I would actually remember it. What we have just experienced together is a gigantic call out to the entire American field. That's okay. The call out's good. Well, actually, my own practice I've named as calling up. Calling out, I have defined as the act of publicly criticizing people for violating the accepted behavioral standards, and calling in as the act of privately criticizing people for violating accepted behavioral standards. And then I made up this term, calling down, the practice of publicly and or privately dismissing or denying or obfuscating all of this abusive, harassing, oppressive stuff, these behaviors and these processes that cultivate and support future negative behaviors and impact. And then, of course, you got the call up, the practice of publicly or privately acknowledging abusive, harassing, oppressive behaviors, inaccessible behaviors, and then participating in transformative justice processes to cultivate future positive outcomes for all of us. Now, the call out, it can become a performance that is negative. It could be done negatively. These are all neutral terms. So the call out could be someone doing a performance of their personal righteousness instead of a way to encourage healthier behaviors for the community. It can be done to support calling down, where ironically, you will have people using the call out to silence others for speaking out against injustice or systems that are hurting and harming those that are mandated to work within them. So in our practice, the call out is necessary. When we witness performances of injustice and we do not disrupt them, we are communicating that that injustice or that oppression or that inaccessibility are accepted behavior and it's what we want. Now the call out can feel awkward because it is interrupting and it is disrupting. But remember, the person who is doing the oppressive act, the person who has created that situation is the one making the moment uncomfortable, and ignoring a problem does not solve it. We need to embrace these moments and lean into them so we can get through them. Avoiding them doesn't help them. Now, the call in can also be equally toxic. It can become about caretaking the feelings of the person doing the oppressive behavior, or it can be used to avoid publicly creating a culture of accountability and restorative justice. So calling in at its best, it helps the recipient of the critique to avoid a defensive public reaction that will cause more harm. I really appreciate Nyạc Lan Tran in Black Girl Dangerous. She gave the frame of calling in as a positive, as a practice of loving each other enough to allow each other to make mistakes, a practice of loving ourselves enough to know that what we've been trying to do here is a radical unlearning of everything we have been configured to believe is normal. And ultimately, a successful call up requires both sides, all of the participants, to participate positively. You need to create a culture of calling up in your institution so that every single person who is collaborating with you is empowered to be a system design expert that is helping you to make your systems better for all of us. So in this moment, I would love for you to write down what your next step in your improving your systems design is. Write it down, commit to doing it. So as we leave this space, we're leaving it in a moment of action and in a moment of commitment. I had several designs for this session since it was emergent and I was unsure of who would arrive. I had actually designed an entire moment for the rest of our participants, those who are less marginalized, to speak and share their experiences and also share their suggestions for further accessibility. And I suggest the entire field maybe dedicate, I don't know, 3-4 hours to this in the future. In the meantime, keep working on this, write down what you're committed to, and if you want to, tweet it out to the world. Tell other people you've committed to this. I'm going to end us 2 minutes early because we don't have to falsely fill space. We have accomplished all we needed to accomplish. So you can unmic yourselves, give yourselves affirmation. This was an hour of, I think, incredibly productive learning and knowledge exchange and meaning making. Y'all are dope. Y'all are awesome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so
Thank
much.
you, Claudia.
Thank you so much,
Claudia.
Thank you.
Thank you,
much.
everybody, so much.
Thank
Great to be with
you.
you.
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank
so
you.
much. I see you. I see you.
I love doing this with you.
Thank you,
I
Claudia.
love with
Thank you,
Claudia.
everyone.
You.